The press room felt like it was holding its breath. Cameras lined every wall, their red lights glowing like warning signals. Reporters squeezed shoulder to shoulder, notebooks ready, phones recording. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your chest feel tight and your heart beat faster. At the podium stood Vice President Kamala Harris, her signature smile plastered across her face. She wore a navy suit, pearl necklace gleaming under the harsh studio lights. Her eyes scanned the room with confidence, almost arrogance. She knew the cameras were watching, she knew millions of Americans were tuned in, and she was ready to attack. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kamala began, her voice carrying that familiar rehearsed tone. "We are here today to discuss the so-called border crisis that President Trump continues to weaponize for political gain." A few reporters shifted uncomfortably. The word "so-called" hung in the air like a slap. Kamala continued, her smile widening. "The truth is, the Trump administration's fear-mongering about our southern border is nothing more than racism disguised as policy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement. Others frowned deeply. But then came the moment that would change everything. Kamala tilted her head back and laughed. That laugh. The one that had become a viral meme across social media. High-pitched, almost mocking, completely dismissive. She waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. "President Trump," she said between chuckles, "wants you to believe that America is under attack. But the reality is, he's just angry because his wall didn't work, his policies failed, and the American people rejected him." The room erupted. Some reporters clapped nervously, others whispered to each other, eyebrows raised. Kamala leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Trump, you can build all the walls you want, but you cannot wall out progress. You cannot wall out diversity, and you certainly cannot wall out the truth." She laughed again, louder this time. But what Kamala didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Donald J. Trump was watching. He sat in the Oval Office, hands clasped on the resolute desk, eyes locked on the screen. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable. Behind him stood J.D. Vance, arms crossed, shaking his head slowly. "Sir, she's mocking you on live television." Trump didn't respond. He simply reached for a thick manila folder sitting on his desk. The folder was marked in bold red letters, "Kamala Harris, Border Czar failures." Kash Patel leaned forward. "Mr. President, do you want us to prepare a statement?" Trump finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "No statement. I'm going live." The room went silent. Everyone knew what that meant. When Trump went live, when he spoke directly to the American people without a script, without handlers, history was made. "Get the communications team ready," Trump said, standing slowly. "It's time America learns the truth about Kamala Harris." J.D. Vance grabbed his phone. Kash Patel nodded sharply. Within minutes, the White House press office was buzzing. Staffers rushed through hallways. Secret Service agents tightened their positions. Meanwhile, back in Kamala's press conference, she was still riding high on her perceived victory. She took questions from friendly reporters, each one lobbing softballs that she knocked out of the park with more laughter and dismissive remarks. "Madam Vice President, how do you respond to critics who say the border is out of control?" Kamala smiled. "I respond by saying those critics need to stop watching Fox News and start living in reality." Laughter erupted from half the room. The other half sat stone-faced. "What about the families affected by cartel violence crossing the border?" Kamala's smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "We are working every single day to address those concerns with compassion and dignity, unlike the last administration which separated children from their families." More applause, more nodding heads. But then a phone buzzed, then another, and another. Reporters began looking down at their screens, eyes widening. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Breaking news! Trump is going live. He's about to respond." Kamala noticed the shift. Her smile froze. She glanced at her aide, standing in the corner, who was frantically typing on her phone. "Madam Vice President," one reporter called out, "President Trump has just announced he's making a live address in response to your statements. Do you have any comment?" Kamala's laugh returned, but this time it sounded nervous, forced. "Well, I look forward to hearing whatever President Trump has to say. I'm sure it'll be very entertaining." But her hands gripped the podium just a little tighter. Across town, Trump stepped into the White House briefing room. The cameras were already positioned. The lights blazed. Staffers lined the walls, all holding their breath. Trump adjusted his tie, rolled his shoulders back, and looked directly into the camera lens. His eyes were sharp, focused, burning with purpose. "Good afternoon, America," he began, his voice steady and calm. "I just watched Vice President Kamala Harris laugh at me. She laughed at the border crisis. She laughed at the American family suffering because of her failures." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But folks, what she doesn't know is that I have the receipts. I have the documents. I have the truth." Trump lifted the manila folder and placed it on the podium with a heavy thud that echoed through the microphone. "And tonight, America is going to learn exactly what Kamala Harris did as Border Czar. And when you hear it, you won't be laughing." The nation held its breath. Millions of Americans stopped what they were doing. Truckers pulled over on highways. Mothers paused dinner preparations. Veterans turned up their TVs. Workers gathered around break room screens. Something historic was about to unfold. Trump opened the folder slowly, deliberately. His fingers traced the top document. "In 2021, he began, President Biden appointed Kamala Harris as the Border Czar. Her job was simple: secure the southern border and stop the flow of illegal immigration." He looked up from the paper, staring directly into the camera. "She failed. Catastrophically." Gasps echoed through the briefing room. Reporters leaned forward. Trump continued, his voice growing stronger. "Under her watch, over 10 million illegal immigrants crossed into this country. 10 million. That's more than the population of New York City." He flipped to the next document. Border Patrol agents were overwhelmed. Fentanyl deaths skyrocketed by 300%. Human trafficking reached record levels. Cartels made billions of dollars. Trump's jaw clenched. And what did Kamala Harris do? She laughed. She avoided the border. She blamed everyone but herself. The room was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. "But it gets worse," Trump said, his voice dropping lower. "Much worse." He pulled out another document, this one stamped with official seals. Kamala Harris visited the border exactly once, one time in 3 years, and you know where she went? Not to the crisis zones, not to the overwhelmed detention centers. She went to El Paso, the safest section of the entire border, for a staged photo op. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Even some liberal reporters shifted uncomfortably. Trump wasn't done. While American families were being destroyed by fentanyl, while children were being trafficked across our border, while our Border Patrol agents were begging for help, Kamala Harris was fundraising in California. She was laughing at cocktail parties. She was ignoring the crisis she was appointed to fix. His voice rose now, carrying weight and emotion. And tonight, she had the audacity to stand in front of the American people and laugh at me? To mock the very crisis she created? Trump shook his head slowly. "Kamala, you're not laughing at me. You're laughing at the families who lost their children to fentanyl. You're laughing at the Border Patrol agents who risked their lives. You're laughing at every American who believed you would do your job." The briefing room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed frantically, but Trump raised his hand, silencing them. "I'm not finished." Trump's hand remained raised, commanding silence. The entire briefing room felt frozen in time. Reporters sat with pens hovering over notebooks. Camera operators zoomed in closer, capturing every detail of Trump's expression. Now let me tell you what really happened, Trump said, his voice calm but razor-sharp. What Kamala Harris doesn't want you to know. He flipped to another page in the folder, his finger tracing down a list of numbers. In fiscal year 2022 alone, Border Patrol encountered over 2.3 million illegal crossings. That's a record, the highest in American history. Trump looked up, his eyes piercing through the camera. And where was the Border Czar? Where was Kamala? He paused for effect. She was in Paris. She was in Poland. She was everywhere except where she was supposed to be. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some reporters frantically typed on their laptops. Others whispered to colleagues. Trump continued, pulling out a photograph. This is Maria Gonzalez. She's from Texas. Her 16-year-old son died from fentanyl poisoning last year. The pills came across our southern border. The camera zoomed in on the photo. A grieving mother holding a picture of her smiling teenage son. Maria wrote to Vice President Harris. She begged for help. She asked Kamala to secure the border so no other mother would lose a child. Trump's voice grew heavier. Kamala never responded, not once. Gasps spread across the room. Even hardened journalists looked shaken. But it doesn't stop there, Trump said, his tone darkening. Let me show you something else. He pulled out another document, this one with official government letterhead. This is an internal memo from the Department of Homeland Security. It shows that Border Patrol requested emergency funding 3 separate times. They needed more agents, more resources, more support. Trump's jaw clenched. Kamala Harris recommended against it, every single time. The room exploded. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions over each other. Mr. President, are you saying she blocked funding? Did she deliberately ignore the crisis? What was her reasoning? Trump raised both hands now, quieting the chaos. Her reasoning? Politics. She didn't want to admit there was a crisis, because admitting it would mean admitting Biden's policies failed. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. So she sacrificed American lives for political optics. The weight of those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Meanwhile, across town, Kamala Harris watched the broadcast from her office. Her earlier confidence had evaporated. She sat rigid in her chair, hands gripping the armrests. Her chief of staff stood beside her, pale and trembling. Madam Vice President, we need to respond. Now. Kamala's voice came out shaky. What? What do we say? I don't know. He has documents. He has proof. Kamala's famous laugh was nowhere to be found. Instead, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted across the screen as Trump continued his devastating reveal. Back in the briefing room, Trump wasn't slowing down. If anything, he was accelerating. Let me tell you about the cartels, he said, pulling out yet another document. While Kamala laughed and avoided responsibility, the Mexican cartels became richer and more powerful than ever. He held up a chart showing cartel revenue. In 2020, before she became Border Czar, cartels made approximately $4 billion from human smuggling. By 2023, that number jumped to $12 billion. Trump's voice rose with anger. $12 billion, folks. Kamala Harris's failure made the cartels richer than some small countries. Reporters scribbled furiously. The hashtag Kamala failed began trending on social media within seconds. Trump flipped to another page, his expression growing even more serious. And here's something Kamala definitely doesn't want you to know. While she was Border Czar, her office spent over $3 million on consultants and advisors. He looked up sharply. $3 million taxpayer dollars. And you know what those consultants recommended? Silence. Nothing. They produced exactly 0 policy changes, 0 improvements, 0 results. Trump slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing like a gavel. So when Kamala Harris laughs at me, when she mocks the border crisis, she's really laughing at every American family that suffered because of her incompetence. The room erupted again. This time the energy was different. Even reporters who typically challenged Trump sat quietly, processing the avalanche of information. Trump straightened his tie, his voice growing softer but more powerful. America deserves better. Our families deserve better. And tonight, I'm announcing something that's going to change everything. Every eye in the room widened. Every reporter leaned forward. Trump looked directly into the camera, speaking not to the press, but to the American people. Effective immediately, I am signing an executive order to deploy 25,000 National Guard troops to the southern border. Gasps. I am authorizing emergency funding to complete the border wall. More gasps. And I am launching a full investigation into Kamala Harris's failures as Border Czar. The room exploded. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed like lightning. The noise was deafening. Trump raised his hand one final time. Kamala, you wanted to laugh at me. Go ahead. But I'm not the one who failed America. You are. He picked up the folder and walked off the podium. The nation sat in stunned silence. Within seconds of Trump's bombshell announcement, the internet exploded. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of millions of Americans reacting simultaneously. On Twitter, hashtags erupted like fireworks. Kamala exposed shot to #1 worldwide. Border Czar failure trended in all 50 states. Trump was right dominated timelines from coast to coast. In a diner in Ohio, construction workers gathered around a small TV mounted in the corner. The sound was barely audible over the clatter of dishes, but every man stood frozen, watching Trump's face on the screen. Did he just say 25,000 troops? One worker whispered. He's not playing around, another replied, his voice thick with emotion. Finally, someone's doing something. An elderly veteran sitting at the counter wiped tears from his weathered cheeks. That's my president, he muttered. That's leadership. Similar scenes played out across America. In Texas, a single mother clutched her phone, watching the replay. Her hands trembled as she read the comments flooding her feed. My son died from fentanyl last year. Thank you, President Trump, for finally telling the truth. Kamala laughed while our communities burned. Never forget. He has receipts. She has excuses. Meanwhile, in Kamala's office, panic had fully set in. Her staff rushed around like ants in a disturbed colony. Phones rang non-stop. Advisors shouted over each other. The vice president sat motionless, staring at her muted television screen. Madam Vice President, CNN is asking for a statement. MSNBC wants a live interview. The White House press office is... Stop! Kamala's voice cracked through the chaos. Everyone froze. She stood slowly, her hands shaking. What? What are my options? Her chief of staff stepped forward, his face pale. Honestly, very few. He has documents, government records, testimony from Border Patrol agents. We can't deny any of it. Kamala's famous confidence had vanished. In its place stood a woman who suddenly realized she had walked into a trap she couldn't escape. Can we spin it? She asked desperately. Blame Trump for politicizing the issue? Her communications director shook his head. Ma'am, the numbers don't lie. 10 million illegal crossings. Record fentanyl deaths. The American people are watching those stats spread everywhere. Kamala sank back into her chair. For the first time in her political career, she had no clever response, no practiced laugh, no way out. Back in the White House briefing room, reporters scrambled to file their stories. Every major news network interrupted regular programming with breaking news alerts. Trump drops bombshell on Kamala Harris, Border Czar failures exposed. Investigation launched into VP Harris. Even CNN, typically hostile to Trump, couldn't ignore the magnitude of what had just happened. Their lead anchor struggled to maintain composure. Whatever your political views, what we just witnessed was extraordinary. President Trump presented documentation that raises serious questions about Vice President Harris's tenure as Border Czar. On Fox News, the reaction was electric. Sean Hannity practically shouted into the camera, "Folks, I've covered politics for decades and I've never seen anything like this." Trump didn't just respond to Kamala's mockery, he systematically dismantled her entire record with receipts, with proof, with undeniable facts. Independent podcasters went wild. Joe Rogan interrupted his scheduled guest to discuss the breaking news. "Dude, did you see that? Trump just brought receipts like he was returning something to Costco. That was surgical." Across America, the emotional impact was profound. In Arizona, border towns that had suffered for years under the surge of illegal immigration erupted in celebration. A small-town sheriff stood outside his station, addressing a crowd of locals who had gathered spontaneously. "For 3 years, we begged for help. We begged Kamala Harris to see what was happening to our community. She ignored us. Tonight, President Trump gave us hope again." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some people cried. Others hugged strangers. American flags waved in the desert wind. In a Florida nursing home, elderly residents gathered in the common room, watching the news coverage. One woman, a 92-year-old World War II widow, clasped her hands together. "I never thought I'd see a president with this much courage again," she whispered. "God bless Donald Trump." But not everyone celebrated. In progressive cities like San Francisco and Portland, protests began forming within hours. Crowds gathered with signs reading "racist" and "Trump lies." Yet even there, cracks appeared. Some protesters quietly scrolled through their phones, reading the documents Trump had referenced. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. One young activist lowered her sign slowly. "Wait," she said to her friend. "These numbers, they're real, from government sources." Her friend snatched the phone away. "It doesn't matter. It's still racist." But doubt had been planted. As night fell across America, Kamala Harris finally emerged. Her staff had prepared a brief statement, carefully worded to avoid admitting fault while trying to regain control of the narrative. She stepped up to a small podium in her office, cameras positioned hastily in front of her. Gone was the confident smile from earlier. Her face looked drawn, tired. "Good evening," she began, her voice lacking its usual punch. "I want to address the false claims made by former President Trump tonight." But before she could continue, a reporter interrupted. "Madam Vice President, are the documents he showed fabricated?" Kamala's jaw tightened. "Aye. We are reviewing the context of those documents." "So they're real?" another reporter pressed. "The situation at the border is complex," Kamala deflected. "It cannot be reduced to sound bites and political attacks." A veteran journalist from the back shouted, "Did you visit the border only once in 3 years?" Kamala's hands gripped the podium. Her famous laugh tried to emerge, but it came out as a nervous chuckle that made everything worse. "I visited the border when it was appropriate and—" "Once," the reporter repeated. "Yes or no?" Silence. Kamala looked at her chief of staff desperately. He stood frozen, offering no help. "The previous administration created this mess," Kamala finally said, her voice rising defensively. "We inherited a broken system." "But Trump showed that crossings tripled under your watch," another voice called out. "How is that his fault?" Kamala's composure cracked. "This press conference is over." She turned and walked away quickly, ignoring the shouted questions that followed her. The clip went viral instantly. Within 20 minutes, Cheeseaser "Kamala ran away" was trending. Side-by-side videos appeared showing her laughing mockingly at Trump earlier, then fleeing from reporters' questions. The contrast was devastating. Meanwhile, Trump posted on Truth Social from the White House. His message was simple but powerful. She laughed, then she ran. America sees the difference between talk and action, border secured, promises kept. The post received 15 million likes in an hour, Across the country, the mood had shifted completely. What started as Kamala's attempted takedown of Trump had become her worst nightmare. Cable news ran split screens: Trump's confident presentation versus Kamala's panicked retreat. Even some Democratic lawmakers began distancing themselves. One senator told reporters, "Look, we need to have honest conversations about border security. The American people deserve better than what we've seen." In homes across America, families discussed what they'd witnessed. Parents explained to their children what accountability looked like. Veterans nodded approvingly at their televisions. The story was far from over. Trump had promised an investigation, and America waited eagerly to see what other secrets would be revealed about Kamala Harris's time as Border Czar. The tables hadn't just turned. They'd been completely flipped. The next morning, America woke up to a changed political landscape. Every newspaper, every morning show, every social media feed told the same story. Kamala Harris had been exposed. Trump appeared on Fox and Friends, calm and collected. "Folks, I didn't attack Kamala. I simply told the truth. Americans deserve to know what their leaders actually do." The hosts nodded. "Mr. President, your documents showed some shocking numbers." 10 million illegal crossings, Trump repeated. "That's not rhetoric, that's reality." And Kamala laughed about it. Meanwhile, the White House released more data. Internal emails showed Kamala's office had indeed blocked Border Patrol funding requests. The evidence was irrefutable. Democratic strategists scrambled. Some suggested Kamala should apologize. Others wanted her to fight back. But how do you fight documented facts? One CNN analyst admitted reluctantly, "Trump came prepared. He had receipts for every claim. That's unusual for him and devastatingly effective." By noon, 3 major Democratic donors had called for Harris to resign as Border Czar. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Trump posted again, "Accountability matters. America first. Always." In Texas, a border town held a spontaneous rally. Hundreds gathered waving American flags, chanting, "Thank you, Trump." Local news covered it live. A Border Patrol agent spoke to cameras, his voice breaking. "For years, we begged for help. Kamala ignored us. President Trump heard us. Finally." The emotional impact rippled across the nation. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. It was about Americans who felt forgotten, finally being heard. Kamala remained silent the entire day. No statements, no appearances. Her office released only a brief note. "The vice president is focused on her duties." But everyone knew the truth. She was hiding, and America was watching. By evening, Trump's investigation was already underway. The Department of Justice announced a formal inquiry into Kamala's handling of border security funds. Social media erupted again. Clips of Kamala's nervous press conference played on loop contrasted with Trump's confident presentation. The memes were merciless. One viral post showed Kamala laughing with the caption, "Before Trump brought receipts." The next image showed her walking away from reporters. "After Trump brought receipts." In swing states, polling showed dramatic shifts. Kamala's approval rating had dropped 18 points overnight. Trump's rose by 12. Democratic senators began calling for accountability. "We need answers," one said carefully. "The American people deserve transparency." Meanwhile, Trump held a rally in Arizona. The crowd was massive, stretching as far as cameras could see. When he mentioned Kamala's name, the boos were deafening. "She laughed at you, folks, at your suffering, at your communities destroyed by drugs and crime. But we're not laughing anymore, are we?" The crowd roared, "USA, USA, USA." Trump continued, "Tomorrow, we're signing that executive order. 25,000 troops to the border. The wall gets finished. America gets protected." Families in the crowd wept openly. Veterans saluted. The energy was electric, emotional, unstoppable. Back in Washington, Kamala watched the rally coverage alone. Her career was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The following day, Trump signed the executive order in a ceremony broadcast nationwide. Surrounded by Border Patrol agents, military officials, and families affected by the border crisis, he made history. "This is for every American who suffered while Washington looked away," Trump declared, pen in hand. "This is for every mother who lost a child to fentanyl, every community destroyed by cartels, every agent who risked their life protecting us." He signed with bold strokes. The crowd erupted in applause. One mother stepped forward, holding a photo of her deceased son. "Mr. President, thank you for caring when others didn't." Trump embraced her gently. Cameras captured the moment. Across America, millions cried watching it. Meanwhile, Kamala's silence continued. Her staff leaked to friendly media that she felt targeted and scapegoated. But the American public wasn't buying it. One poll showed 67% of Americans believed Trump's claims were accurate. Only 23% sided with Kamala. Even late-night comedians, typically hostile to Trump, made jokes about Kamala's disappearance. "Where's Waldo?" More like, "Where's Kamala?" one quipped. By week's end, 3 Democratic congressmen had publicly called for her resignation as Border Czar. The pressure was unbearable. Trump posted simply, "Truth always wins." The nation agreed. 2 weeks later, the Department of Justice released its preliminary findings. The report was damning. Kamala Harris had indeed blocked critical funding requests. She had avoided visiting crisis zones. Her office had spent millions on consultants who produced nothing. The evidence was overwhelming, detailed, and publicly available. News networks spent hours dissecting the report. Even CNN couldn't defend her. "These are government documents," one anchor said quietly. "This isn't partisan spin. This is fact." Trump held a press conference. "I told you the truth. America deserves leaders who serve, not leaders who laugh at their failures." The audience applauded. Reporters, for once, had no hostile questions. That evening, Kamala finally appeared on national television. Her face looked tired, her voice subdued. "I take responsibility for mistakes made," she began carefully. "The border situation was more complex than—" But it was too late. America had already moved on. Trump's border wall construction had resumed. National Guard troops were deployed. Illegal crossings dropped 40% in just 2 weeks. Results spoke louder than apologies. Families affected by the crisis sent letters to the White House. "Thank you for hearing us. God bless President Trump. Finally, someone who cares." Trump read some aloud during rallies, his voice thick with emotion. "This is why we fight, folks. For them." 1 month after the confrontation, the transformation was undeniable. Border crossings had plummeted to levels not seen in decades. Fentanyl seizures increased as enforcement strengthened. Communities began healing. Trump visited border towns, greeted as a hero. Families lined the streets waving flags. Children held signs. "Thank you for protecting us." Kamala, meanwhile, had been quietly removed from her Border Czar role. The White House announced she would focus on other priorities. Everyone understood what that meant. Her political future looked bleak. Donors abandoned her. Allies distanced themselves. The woman who once laughed confidently now avoided cameras entirely. Trump's approval ratings soared to historic highs. Even independents and moderate Democrats admitted he had been right about the border. One viral video showed a former Kamala supporter admitting, "I was wrong. Trump brought receipts. He delivered results. That's leadership." The tables had completely turned, and America knew it. 6 months later, America reflected on what had transpired. The border crisis that once dominated headlines had transformed into a success story. Trump stood at a completed section of the border wall, cameras capturing the moment for history. "We promised, we delivered. That's the difference." Beside him stood Border Patrol agents, their faces proud. One spoke emotionally. "For the first time in years, we can do our jobs effectively. Thank you, Mr. President." Across the nation, families whose lives had been destroyed by the crisis found hope again. Communities rebuilt, schools improved, crime dropped dramatically. Kamala Harris faded from the spotlight, her political ambition shattered by that one moment of laughter that backfired spectacularly. Trump's final words resonated nationwide. "When leaders mock you, bring truth. When they laugh, bring receipts. When they fail, bring results. America First isn't a slogan, it's a promise kept." The crowd erupted. "USA! USA! USA!" The story that began with mockery ended with vindication. America had witnessed the difference between talk and action, between excuses and accountability. And the nation would never forget.